described, but rather, what can he do? Is God free to act? Is God free to accomplish his purposes? If not, then he is no God at all. If so, then he must be anthropomorphic. The gods of Canaan and Babylon were at least good imitations. The prophets do not charge them with being anthropomorphic, however. They charge them with being frauds. As an illustration, one may cite another of the passages which superficially appears to transcend anthropomorphism in the Bible. To whom will you liken me, and make me equal, and compare me, that we may be alike? For I am God, and there is no other. I am God, and there is none like me. Isaiah 46, 5 and 9. Again, however, the context reverses the interpretation. It contrasts the mighty acts of Yahweh with the impotence of every false god. They lift it upon their shoulders. They carry it. It cannot move from its place. It does not answer. He says that in verse 7. The true God, however, does move and speak. He announces his purpose, and he brings it to pass. Verse 11. See, the intent of these passages is to distinguish Yahweh from idols by precisely these anthropomorphic activities. They have mouths, but do not speak, eyes, but do not see. They have ears, but do not hear, noses, but do not smell. Psalms 115, 5 and 6. Pagan gods are contemptible because they are impotent. They cannot even do the things a man can do, whereas Yahweh does these things par excellence. Oh, and this is completely throughout the Hebrew Bible. I mean, this is beautifully enunciated. The moment God acts, however, he violates the specifications of mystical theology. He becomes determinate, the subject of predication. The God who spoke to Moses and delivered Israel. By the mystic's definition, such a God is limited. As the Chinese mystic Chuang Ti expresses it, Tao cannot be named because it cannot be named, that is predicated. Therefore, Tao does not do things. The theologian is consequently confronted with a choice between two kinds of limitation. Now get this. This next point of his is remarkable. We have a choice of two kinds of limitation. He can have a God who, though unlimited by any predicate, is ineffectual. Or he can have a God who, at the cost of being describable, has the power to accomplish his will. For the Bible, the choice is completely academic. The ineffable ground of being is a God in chains. Zeus, Baal, or Ishtar, on the other hand, if they really existed, they would be something to reckon with. Only if God is a definite, determinate personality can he make intelligible, purposive action. Only an anthropomorphic God can be omnipotent. There's a reversal of traditional Christian theology by which we Mormons are excluded from being Christian. But you see, the Christian view of God, because it's adapted the mystic Greek philosophy concepts and applied them to God, isn't the biblical God, is it? It's very remarkable. In what sense is God one? Another axiom of religious philosophy is the unity of God. Again, however, the definition of unity will change as one passes from the mystical to the biblical system of thought. So let's explore this a little. In both systems, this meaning, this idea of unity, reflects their respective definitions of unlimited. For the mystic, God can only be unlimited if he is the sole existent being. If there were two gods, then the second would, by its very existence, condition the first God. No account of the one would be complete without reference to the other God. Carried to its conclusion, this logic forbids not only a second God, but the existence of anything else at all. Anything outside God would reduce him to one term in a relation. God must therefore be without relation. In a word, unconditioned or absolute. See, this is the traditional Christian definition of God. What does Charbonneau have to say about this, though? It is precisely this conception of unity which the Bible opposes. When the prophet cried, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord thy God is one God," he was not referring to the one without a second. He was calling attention to God's constancy of purpose, his integrity of character. Precisely because God is anthropomorphic and an unmistakable personal identity, he could not be represented by a bull or by Baal or a solar disk or any of the other representations. To worship him under any other name than his own is to mistake his identity completely. To do it deliberately is to forsake him. It's therefore misleading. Listen to this. This is a remarkable statement by this biblical scholar. It is therefore misleading for a Christian to speak of the scandal of particularity. Particularity is only a scandal within the mystical worldview where God is the infinite all. In the biblical worldview, on the contrary, particularity is, if anything, an honorific term, for God himself is a particular person. The Jews were not primarily interested in the question, how many gods are there, but rather in the question, to whom do I owe my allegiance? Within the biblical world of thought, it is the mystic who limits God by insisting that God must be unrelated to anything else that is. In other words, God is absolutely absolute. He puts God in quarantine. The mystic finds himself in the embarrassing position of prescribing what God may or may not do. And I've heard Christians say this. They tell us what God can and cannot do. They limit God because they've adapted this Greek mystical philosophy into the biblical deity for their own. But they've missed the boat here. By denying that God is anthropomorphic, he denies him the power to act at all. The biblical God, on the contrary, is unlimited in the sense that he can override the mystic's veto. He can be as absolute or as related as he wants to be, no more and no less. He can, if he chooses, he can take the risk of endowing mankind with freedom. He can, if he chooses, create a universe distinct from himself. By the act of creation, he has become a being besides other beings. For the Bible, to say that God is unlimited is simply to say that with God all things are possible, even creation. This is the difference between monism